Ever heard of a president who was so, I don't know, devoted to serving the people that he actually didn't want the job?
Sounds kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, but that was James Garfield. And his story is just one little piece of the Gilded Age.
Hmm.
That period we always seem to kind of skip over in history class.
It's funny how that happens.
Well, you sent over this History That Doesn't Suck podcast episode, an epilogue, actually.
Hmm.
And Professor Greg Jackson really makes the case for why the Gilded Age is, well, way more interesting than we give it credit for. So today we're going to break down some of the highlights and maybe uncover why this era is still relevant even today.
It's fascinating. The Gilded Age always seems to get squeezed between these huge moments in American history. You've got the Civil War right before, and then everything changing so rapidly at the start of the 20th century. But sandwiched in between, you have this period of monumental change that often gets reduced to just fancy dinners and, I don't know, rich people showing off.
Like it's just a footnote. But Professor Jackson makes it clear that this era was overflowing with larger-than-life personalities, ambitious projects, political dramas. It really makes you look at power and progress in a new light and see the human stories behind what's in the history books.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about it. This is when America was truly transforming.
Yep.
You had rapid industrialization, tons of immigrants coming in, technology changing faster than ever before, and then you have these massive figures in industry, names like Rockefeller, Carnegie. They still cast a long shadow, don't they?
They really do. And yet the presidents from this time, they often get lost in the shuffle. We all remember Lincoln, we remember Teddy Roosevelt, but what about the guys in between? Rutherford B. Hayes, James Garfield, Chester A. Arthur. They tend to fade into the background a bit, don't they?
It's like they're the middle children of presidents, totally forgotten. But Professor Jackson points out their stories are surprisingly relevant to what we're dealing with today. Even someone like Hayes, for example. He was president at the end of Reconstruction, a pretty messy and controversial time, but he was known for his honesty, and he really fought against all the corruption going on with that whole spoils system thing.
Okay, time for a quick refresher. What exactly was the spoils system again?
Basically, it was this practice where government jobs were handed out as favors to people who supported the party, regardless of whether they were actually qualified or not. As you can imagine, it led to a lot of inefficiency and corruption in the government. Hayes hated it and really pushed to change it.
So even in this era that we think of as defined by, robber barons and political machines, you've got someone like Hayes trying to create a more ethical system.
Exactly. And then there's Garfield. His assassination cut his presidency tragically short, and a lot of people think he had the potential to really advance civil rights. A lot of historians believe he would ushered in a much more progressive era if he had had the chance.
It really makes you think, what if? What if he had served a full term? How different would American history be?
It's a big question that historians still debate to this day. And then, of course, you have Arthur, who becomes president almost by accident after Garfield's assassination. But surprisingly, he actually stepped up. He tackled corruption head on and turned out to be a far more effective president than anyone expected.
I have to say, this whole story about Garfield actively not wanting to be president really grabbed me. Professor Jackson describes how, at the Republican convention, Garfield was practically begging his party not to nominate him. It's almost funny, the opposite of what we see in politics today.
Talk about a contrast, right? Imagine a candidate today actually trying to avoid the top job. But it does make you think about leadership in a different way. This idea of duty and service, it's kind of refreshing to consider, especially with the way things are in politics now.
It really challenges what we assume about ambition. And speaking of ambition, the Gilded Age was also a time of just incredible feats of engineering, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Projects like the Brooklyn Bridge and the Statue of Liberty, they're still testaments to how audacious and innovative that era was. These weren't just construction projects. They were massive undertakings that really captured the spirit of progress and possibility that defined the Gilded Age.
The story of the Brooklyn Bridge especially really caught my attention. Professor Jackson tells the story of the Roebling family and how they devoted their lives to this project. It's all about dedication, perseverance, and overcoming huge challenges.
It really is. Talk about overcoming adversity. The Roeblings, they dealt with budget problems, engineering setbacks, even family tragedies. John Roebling, the guy who originally designed the bridge, he died from an accident really early on in the project.
Oh, yeah.
And then his son, Washington Roebling, he took over, but he got really sick with decompression sickness, ended up being bedridden for years.
I can't even imagine the kind of, willpower and resilience they must have had to get that project finished.
And the whole thing is that the messy, sometimes chaotic reality behind these projects is something we can still relate to today, you know what I mean? It's a reminder that even the biggest, most ambitious goals, they're still achieved by people with all their flaws and mistakes.
Kind of brings these big historical moments down to earth, makes them
Yeah.
feel more relatable.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes you really appreciate the all the work and sacrifice behind these iconic structures that, let's be honest, we often take for granted. And while we're talking about iconic structures, we can't forget the Statue of Liberty. I mean, it's practically a symbol of America itself.
And yet, did you know the unveiling ceremony was a total disaster? Professor Jackson tells this story about how they pulled the wrong rope, and the French flag that was covering Lady Liberty's face fell off way too early, right in the middle of a senator giving a speech.
You really can't picture that and not laugh a little bit. This grand symbol of freedom and progress in the unveiling is this total blunder.
It's like a reminder that even these huge historical events, they're still planned by people and, well, sometimes things go wrong. But it also gets you thinking about I don't know, the motivation behind these projects. Was the Statue of Liberty just a symbol of friendship between France and the U.S.? Or was there more to it than that?
Right. Like, was it maybe a bit of a vanity project for the guy who championed it, Augusta Bartholdi? It's probably a little bit of both. It's interesting to think about how idealism and ambition and maybe even a little bit of ego all played a role in creating such an important monument.
It's like history isn't just dates and battles. It's about real people and their motivations and the kind of messy way that human ambition works. And it's those human elements that make history so fascinating, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And those elements, those motivations, they often reflect the challenges we face today. Think about the projects from the Gilded Age, all those budget issues and political maneuvering, the complexity of these massive projects. Does that sound familiar?
It does. Some things never change.
But you know what's inspiring is that despite all those challenges, these huge, ambitious projects, they were successful in the end. They left behind this incredible legacy that we still benefit from today. Millions of people use the Brooklyn Bridge every year, and the Statue of Liberty is still a powerful symbol of hope and opportunity.
It really shows you what humans can do when they put their minds to it. Even with all the drama and chaos, we find a way to move forward and create things that last. And those changes, good and bad, they keep echoing through time, shaping the world we live in now and the future too.
And that brings us back to something Professor Jackson talks about in the podcast, this idea of going back and updating his earlier episodes. He compares it to releasing a second edition of a history book.
Like incorporating new information and perspectives. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It makes you think about how we, the people learning about history, can keep updating our understanding. How can we be open to new evidence and rethink what we thought we knew about the past? Because history isn't fixed. It's always changing. It's a conversation that keeps evolving as we find new things and reinterpret old things.
It is kind of humbling to think that even when you do all this research, there's always more to learn, more layers to uncover. What else is out there just waiting to be discovered in other historical periods, even the ones we think we already know so well?
Yeah.
I think that's what makes history so captivating. It's all about constant discovery. There's always something new to learn, a new way of looking at things. And the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. Makes you want to dig deeper, right? Like, who were all these people? Beyond just names and dates, what were their dreams and struggles?
I know, right? That's what's so cool about history. There's always something more to find out. It's about connecting with those human stories, the people who made our country what it is today.
And even the people who we might think of as, I don't know, less important, they all have a role to play in the bigger picture. It's a good reminder that history isn't just about the big names and famous battles, but about everyone, all the lives that came before us.
It's like this giant tapestry. Even the parts that seem kind of plain at first can be so intricate and beautiful. Who knew the Gilded Age, which is supposed to be all stuffy and extravagant, would be so full of drama and interesting characters?
Exactly, and Professor Jackson really brings it to life. He shows us the Gilded Age isn't just some boring chapter in a textbook. It was a time of huge change and ambitious people dealing with all these complicated problems that we can still relate to today.
And that brings us to the big question. What does all this mean for us now? What are the big takeaways from this whole deep dive into the Gilded Age?
Well, for me, it makes me want to learn more, to look beyond the surface and find the things that surprise you. It's about questioning what you think you know and being open to different perspectives and finding those human connections that make history so interesting.
It's also about realizing that progress isn't always a straight line, you know? It can be messy and complicated and sometimes driven by good intentions and sometimes by selfish ones. Just like the Gilded Age, our time is full of contradictions too.
Yeah, and just like the people who lived through the Gilded Age, we can make a difference in the future. We can learn from their successes and their mistakes, their ambitions and their struggles.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope you'll keep exploring this fascinating period. Maybe read a biography about James Garfield, or take a virtual tour of the Brooklyn Bridge, or learn about the people who immigrated to America back then. Let the stories of the Gilded Age inspire you, make you think, and remember how powerful human ambition and resilience can be.
It's been quite a journey. And who knows, maybe it'll inspire you to do your own deep dive into a different part of history you've always wondered about.
So until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep learning. There's a whole world of history out there waiting to be discovered.